Nisha, and I work at Digital Voices. I'm Chief Client Officer. I'm very excited for this panel. We are going to be talking about all things ROI and how you drive sales from your YouTube content. I know this is going to resonate for a lot of people in the room. I'm pretty sure we all have to come up against our CFO at some point and try and explain exactly what that YouTube budget's going to do. And hopefully today we're going to give you some tips and tricks in terms of how you do that. But I also think there is a perception in the industry that influencer marketing is amazing at driving brand awareness and clicks and views, and don't get me wrong, it is, but absolutely they can be seen as vanity metrics and not something that's going to drive genuine business growth for your brands. And, you know, spoiler alert, it can. You know, we're going to talk a lot today about how YouTube really drives those lower funnel metrics, how you can weigh up with your CFO and your CMO when you're having these things on the plan, and equally, how you can really understand the impact and measure how your campaigns are performing. So I have a very fabulous panel to join me today to really speak about their expertise in this space. So I'd love you if you could all introduce yourself. Chandni, I'll go with you first. I know we've heard from you already, but just in case anybody's forgotten or turned up for this panel.
Hello, I'm Chandni. I'm the head of paid and partnerships here at Digital Voices.
Hi again. I'm Nish. I'm creative business lead at Google.
And I'm Lauren Warnock, so I lead the insights team at ThisThat. We're a brand lift agency built for influencer marketing.
As I said, a perfect experts. We're not just recycling all the guests today. We've really got some great knowledge here that we're going to lean on. But yeah, first of all, I'm going to focus in mainly on organic content. So there's obviously lots of different ways that you can run content on YouTube. And I really want to make sure you guys can understand the benefit of all of that. So we're going to lean in a little bit on organic to start with. So Nisha, I want to start with you. If brands are running organic content on YouTube, what are the things they can really focus in on to make sure that that content can drive sales and performance metrics for them?
Yeah, so when we talk about organic, it's not too different to when we talk about how you show up on paid as well. And specifically when we talk about creating action and getting your audience to do something, direction's the one thing that we really lean on. And you know, using kind of codes, using making sure you're what we call see and say. So you know, making sure that they can see what they're going to or what action you want them to take, as well as the creator saying it as well. All of those things are really, really important in terms of making sure you create that action at the end. The other thing I would say, just from learnings, is that what we have found is when you choose a mix of creators, we found that more of those kind of micro creators actually tend to create more conversions versus some of those big macro ones as well. So I think that's something definitely to think about, is when you're looking at results and kind of making sure ROI is embedded in that, is having that mix of creators as well as the kind of right content.
I love that. That's a great insight. I think there's really shows that there's a different role for every creator on the plan, but actually some of them really kind of drive different metrics. And if you've got any examples maybe of different verticals or formats that you guys at YouTube have seen particular success with when it comes to those bottom funnel metrics?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I would say all those formats, depending on what the actual creative is, can do that in terms of those bottom funnel metrics. You know, Shorts works really well from an action perspective, as well as some of our other formats. But I think the important part is kind of what you're putting into those ads, as well as making sure that you are creating the right ad for the right part of the funnel. So if you are wanting to create action, make sure that action creative is different to your consideration format as well as your awareness, and that's one of the things we see, you know, brands struggle with slightly, and we understand it. It's hard to create many different assets for across the funnel, but I would say that's one of the things that I would take away from this is, you know, how do I create for the objective that I'm trying to adhere to.
Yeah, I think that also really goes back to making sure we brief properly, you know, like we're collaborating with you guys or, you know, brands in the room, briefing and making sure we've got really clear KPIs. So when we are working with influencers, obviously we can make sure that content's optimized. Yeah. And Chandni, I had a question for you. I would love to hear from kind of your experience, any particular campaigns or examples where you've seen some really great success in terms of ROI on organic content on YouTube, and any kind of learnings you can share with the audience.
Yeah, of course. So the first one, I actually have three. So the first one is Surfshark. We have been working with Surfshark VPN since 2019, and we started with around 4 creators. Currently today, we have ran with over 2,000 creators, producing over 4,000 pieces of branded content. And out of that, we've seen over 1 billion views. So I know that's a load of stats, but that just shows truly the growth that a client has had when they've tested, scaled, and learned, and how they've used kind of measurement to find the sweet spot on YouTube. So pulling back the question a little bit to sales and kind of example of ROI, 65% of Surfshark sales has come from YouTube integrations. So that really, again, as I mentioned, and we spoke about it a little bit before, but shows how when you find the right creator, you build a partnership, you build that community, you really do kind of find the sweet spot in terms of ROI. I love this stat. It's not really a stat, it's an example, but there's a creator. So internally, we run a lot of measurement, and from our measurement, we saw that the particular vertical that was converting quite strongly for Surfshark was drag queens. So with that, Surfshark decided to partner with a drag queen called Bussy Queen, and they have produced over 54 pieces of content since we've partnered with them over 3 years ago, and they have shown that their community really do trust kind of their recommendations, and we've seen a high ROI from those videos. So again, it just goes back to kind of that ROI, that relationship building, and that community. 2 other very quick examples I can give is we have recently been working with Printful to kind of reshape the print on demand aspect and perspective. Recently on a campaign for YouTube in particular, we saw over 700 signups working with 700 signups with 20 creators. So again, that shows you when you find and you test and you scale, you can really kind of drive your conversions and your subscriptions to the kind of appropriate business metric. And the last one is Trilogy. Some of you may or may not know, it is a New Zealand beauty brand. We partnered with them really to focus pushing YouTube viewers to kind of their D2C kind of link, but also their Amazon link, and they saw over 3 times higher traffic and conversions to their Amazon link in particular when running on YouTube. So I hope some of these examples give you guys kind of the yay to go ahead maybe and test, but also it just shows you, as I keep mentioning, the strength of test, scale, community, and really finding that right sweet spot on YouTube for your brand.
I love that drag queen example. You just don't know where these sales and ROI can come from, and I think it really proves the point that I think Rachel mentioned on the panel earlier, that don't be shy, lots of testing, and you might fail, you might learn, and I think in that instance that was definitely a huge success, so credit to the team on that.
Yeah, and just really quickly to add, Digital Voices overlay everything with their measurement. So we either use UTM parameters or tap into Google Tag Manager. So that is how we identified that vertical, was really utilizing the tech in-house and being able to report back on a weekly basis to our clients in order for them to find the right vertical, the right audience, and then, of course, scale from there.
I love that. I actually read something recently that Bumble would announce that their best performing YouTube content was bull riders. You just don't know where it's going to come from. I think that ties in lovely, because I think you've talked a little bit about measurement there, Chandni, and I think what you guys are doing at ThisThat is genuinely professionalizing the industry, providing brands and agencies with much more substantial data on how their campaigns are performing. So I'd love to hear from you in terms of, firstly, I think something I'm really interested in is this term vanity metrics, which is talked a lot about in the industry, and is there a role for them? But equally, what are the key metrics you guys look at and think you would advise brands to really understand to kind of move forward with knowing how their content's performing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So views, likes, engagement, those so-called vanity metrics, we think they absolutely have a place. They're great. They're really helpful for getting an initial read on how a campaign is landing. But as we've said, they only tell part of the story, in that they only really tell you about the top of the funnel. So the things that we focus on, if we really want to understand success, are full funnel metrics. So not just how many people are reached, but how many people are aware, how many people would consider your brand, how many would take action and purchase, and then beyond that, actually, how many people are actively advocating for your brand as well. And becoming champions. So if you can understand, if you can measure along the funnel, you can understand where you performed, where you didn't perform so well, and where in the funnel you fell down. That really gives you the learnings to be able to take on board and optimize every time. And we see that's most successful when you're doing it across multiple campaigns. And I think with vanity metrics is also worth saying that you can always spend more to get better vanity metrics. You can pay for more reach or more views, but you can't pay for better effectiveness. That can really only be earned, as we've said earlier today, around by the strength of your content and that connection that you really have with your communities as well. So that's why the full funnel is so important to us.
I love that. Yeah, you can't buy effectiveness. I think that's a really great kind of takeaway from today. So thank you. So we talked a little bit about organic content and driving sales. And something we touched upon earlier was creator paid ads. So just a little reminder for anybody in the room or anybody that might have joined us. So Chandni spoke earlier about creator paid ads, and they're ultimately using kind of creators and influencers for creating paid assets. So think about your kind of brand ads that you're running on YouTube, your pre-roll, your bumpers, kind of replacing those or even testing them alongside your brand creative, but with content that's being created by creators. So it's not just boosting organic content, it's genuinely making best practice paid ads with influencers at the heart. And I want to delve a little bit deeper into that because we talked about it briefly earlier, but really now I want to understand like what's their role when it comes to driving ROI and sales. So Nish, I'm going to come to you first, and I have a quick question on, what's your view when it comes to brands running kind of brand paid ads versus creator paid ads?
Yeah, I think there's a role in having them together, to be honest, and I don't think it has to be one or the other. Both can kind of play that role within your kind of marketing funnel and be able to address all the objectives that you have. We know though that creator ads specifically have performed really well for the brands that we've worked with. So just want to touch on Adobe. I know Tom's here from Adobe, but one of the things that we really found really effective with those creator paid ads that we ran is just how intrinsically kind of the creator talked about the brand within that paid ad format, how authentically it was done. But also the interesting part was kind of how effective it was from a kind of ROI perspective in terms of actually creating that action and engagement and a connection with the brand off the back of that. And so we were pleasantly surprised at how well it worked. And then having that paired alongside the brand ad makes it even more effective and increases the effectiveness of your campaign in total.
I actually read a report from Nielsen last week that said they identified that kind of testing on YouTube brand versus creator paid ads. Creator paid ads were 11 times more effective in driving ROI. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that you kind of talked about there being a role for both, but what do you think the insight is there in terms of why creator ads are performing so well?
Yeah, I think it's so you're creating an ad on a platform where the audience is already familiar with both the format and the creator itself. So there's the authenticity, there's the engagement, there's the implicit kind of, I understand this, it makes sense to me, it's speaking to me. And I think that's the really important bit and the balance to get. And Rachel mentioned it earlier, but it's kind of choosing the right creator for your brand, but also that works on the platform with the message that you're saying. Like, I think, those work because they're really well thought through, and it's not using a creator for the sake of using a creator in your ad, but it's making sure that's kind of a well thought through process, leaning into the formats that are really familiar on the platform. So making sure you're kind of, looking at your audience insights on the platform and saying, what are my audience interested in? How do we speak to them in the right way within this ad? And I'm not surprised it's 11 times more effective. And we do see that it is more effective, and we know that it works. So,
Are there any kind of particular formats you've seen success from, or do you think it's more down to the content than it is the kind of paid format that brands are testing?
So what we do see is the more variety, the better. So I think one of the things that we've seen is rather than going out with one asset, the most important thing is to have a suite of assets. So have your creator in your bumper ads as well as kind of your longer form, kind of 60-second and above, but your 30-second, your 15-second cut down, your shorts version, making sure that they are seeing that ad and different, and we talk about not cutting down but building up. So, making sure you're building for that specific format. So if it is a short, don't just take your horizontal ad and verticalize it, create a specific short for the ecosystem. The more assets you create, you will increase the effectiveness of your campaign through that.
Don't cut down, build up. I'm stealing that. I like that. Chandni, as our kind of paid social specialist on the panel, I'd love to hear from you in terms of how do we optimize creator paid ads for ROI? Is it the same as kind of looking at brand ads? Is there anything we can learn?
Thank you. Great question. I would say there's 3 parts to this to answer it. Oh God, I've always come with 3.
Yeah, I love it.
3 answers. The first is measure, scale, and optimize in order to understand exactly where your audience is and how your demographic is reacting to those assets. The second is always measure, please. We recommend having UTMs on the end of every link, but also creating bespoke creator links. So what I mean by that is making sure that each creator has a unique code or a unique UTM. We've even been testing with QR codes, which has been really, really great. And the last would definitely be CTAs. So rotate your call to actions, please. Always make sure you have a variation of call to actions that are, of course, within the sphere that you're targeting. So whether that's awareness, consideration, or conversion, rotate your call to actions. Make sure that your call to actions are not only verbally communicated by the creator on the asset, but they are also in the subtitles or in the piece of copy that you put out. I would say, that kind of sums up how I would personally say would be best practice on the platform to ensure that not only are you driving ROI, but you're measuring it at scale and with accuracy as well.
And have you seen any big no-nos from brands in terms of, creator content that's been run, and anything we can kind of advise the audience on?
Yes. We've had a couple examples. I would say UTMs weren't used appropriately would be the best example I could give. We duplicated, or the brand, should I say, duplicated the UTMs with the same creator code. So what that meant is the attribution was all pushing back to one creator, when in actual fact, that individual had only one asset and all the other creators had 3 to 4. And thankfully, that was picked up by our fantastic head of measurement in the back of the room, Jamie. And again, that demonstrates why you should always have that tracking and the reporting. UTM was one example. Another was the same call to action on 18 different pieces of content. Especially, I think Jack spoke about it a little bit in the previous panel, but allowing the creator to have creative freedom is something that we really advocate for at Digital Voices. And we completely understand when you need a script, but having the same script for every creator can be detrimental to the performance of the campaign, especially when we're talking ROI and especially when you're testing on a platform such as YouTube. You need to have different metrics to be able to A/B test, I would say. So those are 2 examples, I would say, that haven't necessarily lended well to the results, but we learned, we optimized, and we advised.
Love that. I love the honesty today in terms of just kind of talking about what has and hasn't worked. And I think that, yes, there's a lot to be learned when it comes to creating the right assets and running them in the right way for ROI. But obviously, measurement and tracking is really key. And I think that's very lovely segue into Laura, our measurement expert. I'm really interested to hear not just about how you guys are measuring, but really about how your brands and your partners are taking that insight and using it to be better. So I'd love to hear about how you guys are either partnering with brands on that, or even examples of brands who have kind of taken some great learnings and really optimized what they're doing strategically to be better in the future.
Yeah, so a really great case study and a partner that we've been working with for a long time is Meta, as I say, long-term partner for us, and we work with them across multiple campaigns. One of the things we worked with them on was the launch of MetaQuest, and so for that we delivered a series of studies for them where each of them was focused on a different stage of the funnel, and each of them was taking learnings from the last one into the next. So the first one was all focused around awareness, and that's where we identified that it was fitness content that was doing the best at driving awareness, but also in terms of shifting perceptions of affordability, which was a real blocker for the new product. In the second study, we then focused in on fitness and we tested 9 different creator verticals, and that's where we found out that it was dance creators that were the best at landing the key messaging. And so in the third study, we then zeroed in on dance creators and we looked at what are the things that really drive purchase. And that's where we found that it was actually a paid amplification of organic, always-on content that was the best at really driving performance. So a good example there of each stage of the campaign, we were working with them to recommend specific optimizations to keep pushing customers down that funnel and ultimately help them drive it over 1,000 times ROI over the course of the year for their spend on that campaign. So great example of focusing on bottom line.
Wow, I love that. I also think that's really interesting. Actually, you identified different verticals for different parts of the funnel. Yeah, really, really interesting. They were all my questions for today's panel. Before I go to questions, I actually just wanted to understand a little bit more from the audience in terms of, who's testing YouTube at the moment or has tested for ROI. So I just thought we'd have a little raise of hands in terms of if you've used YouTube and it's been used to drive lower funnel metrics. Any hand raisers? Pete, you can't raise your hand. You work at DV. Yeah, I mean, really surprisingly, only a few. And in all honesty, it's kind of what I expected, because I do think using creators using YouTube for lower funnel has really been neglected. And I think it goes back to my point earlier about the fact that creator content has predominantly been seen as something that drives upper funnel, big brand metrics. And I really hope that today we've proved otherwise, and that you can have a full funnel opportunity. And, I love how you guys are identifying. Actually, each stage of the funnel is completely different, and you might have dance creators doing one part and fitness doing another. And I think really it's the testing, and I really hope everybody goes away today and really thinks about the opportunity that YouTube has when it comes to driving lower funnel metrics. And if anyone wants to chat more about that, obviously we've got the experts here today. But before we wrap up, I'd love to kind of go to the audience and hear from you guys. Any questions, anything we didn't cover that you'd like to ask? We've got a few hand raisers. Zoe, I'm going to go to you first.
I've actually got one sort from the last session as well, but the 42% that aren't on TikTok, do you know anything about their demographics, what makes them different and why they're not sort of there? Are they like really old or really super young and they're on their sort of like social gateway drug? I mean,
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. So what that specific stat is for across all of our audiences, but we can kind of look at a breakdown. I think just on knowing kind of the platform generally, it is what we see is that it is kind of going to look at content that otherwise I guess is part of that kind of community fandom kind of experience. So it's kind of accessing content that they wouldn't get on TikTok. It may skew older, but actually, interestingly, we do see kind of that whole younger demographic are still really prevalent on the platform and are also spending a lot of time. And like I said earlier, like 72 minutes a day are spent on the platform. So I think it's more that we've got kind of that ecosystem of not just short form, but long form also. So, and I think that spans across all audiences, whether you're younger or older. And it's kind of the depth of content, I think, that they're spending the time with.
Brilliant. And we've got one more question here in the front.
That was me, right?
Yeah, that was you.
So, it was actually Surfshark. The thing that I knew I needed a VPN, and I had the brand awareness from 2 different creators. So Max Bosch has recently been working with them, and the guy who's building this massive underground bunker, Colin Firth. So I was sort of caught at a crossroads. I was like, okay, I'm aware of both of these creators, and they're both great creators. I was like, who do I give the credit to, kind of thing? And actually, it was a case of, I get advertised this quite a lot because I watch their videos a lot. And start for me. I bought a VPN because at the time I needed a VPN. So I actually ended up not using any of them. So I imagine I'm not, like, yes, I'm an educator in this scenario, but like I imagine I'm not the only person, and I think brands, have this issue where, maybe at the time of them seeing the ad, it's not the right time for that impulse buy. How do we still attribute to where we actually think the sale sort of came from in the best way? I don't think there's a straight answer for this, and I think it's a fundamental thing that needs to be solved. But what's the best way of doing that? Is it brand lift, or is it something else we should be measuring to try and attribute correctly?
So I can take the first part of that, and I may hand over Lauren after from an agency perspective, so an influence agency perspective. That's okay. You're so close. So firstly, I love the fact that you were really thinking about who to give the...
What a considered consumer.
I know, it's brilliant. But how we would typically do it is any time a consumer would convert, either they click through on the link in the copy at the bottom, there would be a code attributed to that conversion, right? How Surfshark typically work is that the life cycle for these are 6 months or 12 months. So you can subscribe for 6 months or 12 months or monthly rolling. The thing with that is once we hand the conversion over, we don't really re-ingest the data back. So what we would recommend is looking at the affinities and the behavior on YouTube and how that consumer is reacting to those certain segments or the short or the integration, and seeing if they're clicking through and engaging. That shows that they are within the purchase cycle or the trigger window to convert. In terms of measurement part of it, we would obviously overlay a brand lift partner to support things like action intent, purchase intent, but that comes at the later stage once we kind of identify who the consumer is. So from a paid perspective and from a agency perspective, to identify your demographic for the brand, that's how we would go about it. And then for the second half of the question, I may hand over to you.
Yeah, I think as you've said, from a brand lift perspective, that's something we do a lot of. So we often either compare individual creators, or we also group assets to look at different creative verticals or different creative approaches. So that is what you'd have from a brand lift perspective, is you'd be able to compare KPIs for the group who are exposed to creator A versus creator B across those core funnel metrics that we've talked about, but also across things like favorability or curiosity. So you could see which creators actually perform best at kind of driving interest versus driving intent.
I'm actually going to take my moderator hat off and put my agency one on, because I have another thought on this. As you just kind of alluded to, there's no perfect science behind kind of attributing everything and making sure you give fair credit to the creators that deserve it. But I think you should have a kind of a three-way approach. I'm stealing Chandni's favourite number to measurement. And I think firstly it's finding the best way between you and your agency, or you and your analytics team, on platform measurement. So attributing everything the best you can with it, the tracking you have within your capabilities. Then you have your brand uplift partner, making sure you really understand kind of like outside of those metrics, what are you seeing. But actually what you just described, I would say, is kind of like a halo attribution. So we can't directly attribute you to the campaign, but something like econometrics should be used then to have a look at kind of wider measurement. It's not something we've touched upon just yet on the panel, but I do think it's a really important way to understand the way campaigns are performing. And you can obviously do brand, MMM, but equally, I think from an ROI perspective, it's a great way to look at the halo sales. I saw an ad this morning, it's a considered purchase, and I'm going to go straight to the site tomorrow. Nobody's going to know that I came from that campaign. But econometrics is a great way of doing that. And I think as an agency, we're seeing a lot more brands put influencer marketing into their econometric models where it traditionally hasn't been there. And we're really excited to be partnering quite a few brands this year where we're doing that and already seeing some really exciting results. So if that's not something you're considering, I definitely recommend putting that data into, if you're using an MMM or an econometric partner. And if not, then really thinking about that as well. Hope that helps.
Yeah, it does.
Any other questions? We've got one over here.
I'm curious from an agency perspective and also from a brand, sorry, from this that we really live, but from what converts, how much as an agency do you audit the actual purchase journey? So once somebody clicks on a link, whether it's through YouTube or other platforms, if you've ever, give you an example, if you've ever bought flowers from Interflora versus Bloom and Wild have this phenomenal experience. You go through and it takes you about 30 seconds. How much as an agency can you weigh in on that
I might still. I'm sorry. I'm just like star of the show now. But yeah, I have some thoughts on this. So we I wish we could have more impact, I won't lie, but we do our best. So Jamie's laughing at the back because sadly it's his job to do this. So we will audit our clients' conversion journey or consumer journey, and if they're asking us to drive sales, we need to know what we're getting ourselves into. If we're being, kind of pushed on a CPA or an ROI figure, we need to be able to say yes or no, we can't deliver that. We're never going to promise something we can't do. So yes, firstly, we will audit our conversion-focused clients, and we will give recommendations. I'm sure all the brands in the room are thinking, well, great, but it's really difficult for us to implement them. I have 6,000 people who have an input on my brand website. Doesn't mean we won't try. I think it's giving them the best practice. One thing that we do offer to our kind of lower funnel clients is CRO. So ultimately, we'll create mini micro sites on behalf of the client for the consumer journey to happen there and not on the brand site. It's not always a perfect fit because some brands have difficulties in signing that off, but we do find the majority of them allow us to do that. So ultimately, it means consumer clicks out of YouTube to kind of buy, said product, and actually their experience is so much better because we make bespoke landing pages that still feel like the journey they've just experienced. So their favorite creators' faces on the content, it still has that fun feel that they've seen within the content, and we can make them designed exactly to feel and look like, that YouTuber's channel. So firstly, drop-offs not as bad because ultimately the journey is cleaner and quicker, and ultimately it's amazing for us because it's much more trackable. So I think in the absence of being able to optimize a conversion journey on site, we definitely recommend working with a partner who can provide those micro sites where we can kind of mop up all of the conversions and report back. But I think it's agencies' job to check that journey and make sure what they're doing is going to be as effective as possible. Hope that helps. Any other questions? Fabulous. I hope everybody's running back to their office to sign off some ROI YouTube campaigns. So thank you so much. We're going to head on to panel 3. We'll give you a quick minute to grab some water if needed. Otherwise, thank you very much. And thank you to my wonderful panelists.